Hey everyone, Nick Marzinski here at TrappingLight.com, and I've spent the last few videos discussing the overlay blend mode and how it can be used for dodging and burning as well as adding textures to an image. In this video I'm going to show you two additional effects that you can do using that overlay blend mode, and that's adding a portrait glow effect as well as sharpening an image. So let's get started. Here I have a shot of my youngest daughter Natalie, and this is the end result of the shot after all of the starting edits that I've done. I'll show you, here's what it started out as. And I shot this image in my bathtub. So you can see that there's some tile and there's some pink thing that's right over here. I don't even know what that is. The very first edit that I made was a contrast adjustment using a levels adjustment layer. So if I click on it, just to show you what it is, I dragged the white point all the way over to considerably brighten the image, as well as, and I added a little bit of a black point drag just to add additional contrast. So basically this is a contrast adjustment. It just kicks the contrast up a bit. The next thing I did is I added a new fresh layer, and I used that to get rid of this pink object that's right over here, as well as to fix a few blemishes on my daughter's face. So that's what it looks like after. This is before and after. My final adjustment is a levels adjustment, and if you look here you can see that that adjustment is masked. If I hold down Alt and click on the layers mask, you can see that it's being applied to the top up here as well as a little bit to the bottom. And all it is it's a brightening levels adjustment, which just basically takes the entire background of the image and blows it out, makes it completely white, because I don't want to see that. All I want to see is my daughter. So these edits are done, and I like with how I'm pretty happy with how they've turned out. But here's what I want to do now. I want to give her a bit of a subtle glow effect. Now there's plugin packages that you can buy, like Nik Color Effects Pro, that come with a glamour glow filter. But let's say that you don't have any of those plugins. How can we accomplish the same thing in Photoshop? Turns out it's actually pretty easy. But in order to do that, we're going to have to use a filter. If you're not familiar with filters, all of the filters that Photoshop has are found here in this filters drop-down menu. And filters are a bit different than adjustment layers. Adjustment layers, such as these levels adjustment layers that I have here in the image, don't actually have any image data in them. They're applied above image layers to basically adjust them. Filters, on the other hand, need to be applied directly to an image layer to change the image. So the way it works with a filter is I would select an image layer, such as, for example, my bottom layer here, which is the original image, come up to filter, select my filter, the filter that I want to use, and then it would get applied to that image layer. Usually, but not necessarily always, this is another point that's important to remember, filters are applied at the top of a layer stack after all of your adjustments have already been done. And in this case that's a bit of a problem, because my top layer in my layers stack here is an adjustment layer which doesn't have any image data on it, so I can't apply a filter to it. And I need to think of a way to get around this. Well, there's a few things that I could do. The first is that I could just simply drag my original image here up to the top and create a filter here. But the problem, which you can see when I did that, is that by dragging it above all of my edits, now all of those edits are no longer visible. My original image is completely covering them because it's at the top of the layer stack. So this clearly isn't going to work. The other thing that I could do is I could go up here to Layer, and I could click Flatten Image. And that would get me to a point where now I've got this layer here that incorporates all of my edits. But the problem is that all of those edits now are completely baked into the image. If I ever want to go back and redo any of them, I can't. They're completely gone. So this is really a destructive way of doing it, and I would prefer to be able to come up with a way that doesn't involve having to get rid of those edit layers in case I want to revisit that. So I'm going to undo that by pressing Control Z. The best way to do it, and the way that I usually use, is called a stamp visible command. What it does is it creates a new image layer above all of the layers in my layers palette, but this new layer includes all of my edits. The way to do that is to click on the top layer in your stack. So I'm going to click on this levels adjustment here, and I'm going to press Control, Alt, Shift, and E. If you're on a Mac, that's Command, Option, Shift, and E. And what that does is it creates this new layer here. And if I enable or disable this layer, you can see that nothing changes. And the reason for that is that this new layer has all of my adjustments baked into it. Now, this is the layer that I'm going to apply my glow filter to. So I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it glow so that I remember what I did here later on if I ever come back to this image. I'm going to select this layer, come up here to filter, go to blur, go to Gaussian blur. Now, the Gaussian blur tool filter is pretty simple. It's just simply one slider and a little preview window. Now I've got this preview box checked here, which means that it's going to show me what it's doing directly on my image. And the further to the right that I drag this radius slider, the more blur it's going to give to my image. Now, if I was going to do something like, say, a skin softening or something like that, I would keep my blur low, just enough to get rid of any blemishes that I wanted to blur out on an image, and then I would just mask this layer in. But in my case, what I'm going to want to do to create a glow effect is I'm going to want to drag this radius very, very high so that pretty much all of the detail is obscured, something to like 130 to 140. So what I've got here looks pretty good. I'm going to click OK, and it's going to apply that filter to this layer here. So now when I disable this layer, you can see that there's an obvious change. This is without the filter being applied. This is the image with the filter being applied. With that filter applied, I'm going to click on the layer here, come up to my blend modes drop down and select overlay. Now in this case, the overlay blend mode looks a little severe to me. There's a few different ways that I can go about changing that. One way is I can dial down the opacity a bit to kind of get some of that effect to go away. And that works, but there's a better way, which is to change it from overlay to soft light. In this case, right out of the gate, this is looking a heck of a lot better. I think I'd probably just drag the opacity down just a little bit. And this is what it looks like before and after. And I'm really rather liking what this glow effect here is doing with a Gaussian blur and a soft light blend mode applied to the image. But there's one change that I want to make, and that's while I like how it looks with the glow overall, I don't want it to be applied to her eyes. I don't want any sharpening to go away on her eyes, because the eyes are really the focal point. That's the thing that people are going to notice first, and so I want to make sure that those eyes are nice and sharp. And the way to do that is to mask out the glow effect using a layer mask. So I'm going to make sure that this layer is selected again, and I'm going to come down here to the bottom of my layers palette where I've got this add layer mask icon, which is a circle inside of a rectangle. Click it, I get my layers mask. It's white, meaning that this glow effect is being applied to the entire image. I can grab a brush, make sure that my brush's hardness is set to 0, and my foreground color is set to black, because black is going to erase erase the effect. Again, with a layer mask, white reveals and black conceals, so I want to conceal the effect on the eyes. I have my foreground color set to black, and then I'm just going to paint right over her eyes to make sure that they're not getting any of the glow effect. So that's with the layer mask off, and that's with the layer mask on. So now her eyes are not getting that glow effect that's occurring everywhere else in the image. Now that that's done, there's one additional effect that I want to do to this image, and that's that I want to sharpen it. And I don't want to sharpen everything, but I really want to make sure that those eyes are nice and sharp. Well, I can do that using another filter that's called high pass, but in order to do that, I'm going to need to make a new copy of the layer. I don't want to apply it directly here because I've got my glow going on here. So again, I'm going to press Control Shift Alt and E to get a brand new copy of the layer, which is going to also incorporate the glow effect as well as the masked out eyes here. Make sure this layer is selected, go up to Filter, and in this case, rather than going to Blur Gaussian Blur, I'm going to go down to Other here, and I'm going to select High Pass. Now, High Pass has the same sort of layout as the Gaussian Blur. It's only got one slider for radius. However, the difference is that the way high pass works is when it's completely turned off, what you get is you get an image here that is 50% gray. By dragging this radius slider to the right, what the high pass filter is starting to do is it's starting to perform some degree of edge detection. So what you're seeing here, the further that this gets dragged over, is that you're going to start to see edges appear through the gray. So when I get to about 3, you can start to see her eyes here appearing, as well as a little bit of her hair. The further that I drag it, the more effects, the more edges that you can see. So at 6, now we're starting to see her nose and a little bit of the curves of her face. And if I really drag it out, then you can start to see those edges in pretty stark detail. Drag it all the way to the edge, and it looks fairly similar to how it looked before. Now, with high pass, less is generally more, and in order to do a good job sharpening an image, you don't want to drag it all the way out here and say, okay, here it is, I'm done, my image is sharp. This is not the way that this filter is designed to be used. When you're using it for sharpening, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to keep your radius pretty low, just so you can start to see the details in your image. Generally, as a rule of thumb, I like to keep my radius between about 3 and 5. I generally don't like to go much higher than 5, because then you start to see, when it's actually applied, you start to get some halo effects, some weird edge effects that don't look very good. They're actually defects on the image. So I want to keep this low. With my radius here set to 4.2, I've already got her eyes pretty well defined here in the gray. That's what I'm looking for. I want those eyes to be nice and sharp. So I've got my radius set. I'm going to just click OK, and the filter gets applied. Now I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call this layer Sharpening, so I remember what it's being used for. And the way it looks right now, it looks pretty bad, but remember, when we're using overlay, it's going to take that 50% gray and it's going to make it invisible. So I'm going to just change my blend mode here to overlay, and that's what I get. This is what it looks like with the effect off. This is what it looks like with the effect on, and it just gives a little bit of punch to the eyes right here. As a matter of fact, I could probably go back and make it just a little bit stronger. So I'll click on this, go back up to filter, click on high pass because it's the last filter that I used. Oh, that's right, it won't let me adjust if I do that. So go to other, go to high pass, and then I'm going to drag this up to near 5. There, now a little bit down. There we go, 5.1. Eyes are nice and defined there. Select overlay. And there we go. Now we get a bit more of a pop. So I'm going to rename this again to Sharpening. I can't spell today. There we go. So now I've got my sharpening layer. But again, as with the glow layer, I don't want it to be applied everywhere. I just simply want to have that effect applied right to her eyes. And I can simply grab a layer mask and come in here, and now it's white. I want to change it to black, so I'm going to hit Control-I to invert it, and then I could grab my brush, change the foreground color to white, so that I'm going to reveal this sharpening effect on her eyes, and then paint her eyes in, and that's certainly one way I can do it, and that works. However, instead of doing it that way, I already have a layer mask below that actually incorporates the eyes. The only difference is that in this layer mask for the glow filter, the eyes are the effect is being hidden on the eyes. The eyes are black, whereas I want them in the layer mask to be white. So I can certainly add a layer mask and paint in the eyes, and that works. But another way of doing it is to grab this layer mask that I've got below, make a copy of it on this layer, and then simply invert it. If you're interested in doing that, the way to do it is to hold down the Alt key or Option key on a Mac, grab the layer mask, drag it up, and it makes a copy of it. Then with the layer mask selected on your new layer, you just hit Control or Command-I, and that inverts it. It gets you to the exact same spot, but now I don't have to repaint anything. It's already being done for me. So that's how to apply both glow and sharpening to an image using filters as well as an overlay blend mode, as well as using layer masks in order to show or hide the effect. So in the case of sharpening, here I wanted to apply sharpening just to the eyes. If this was, for example, if I was editing a landscape shot In that case, I may want to apply the sharpening just to the ground, but make sure that the sky doesn't have any sharpening applied so that the clouds appear nice and soft or something like that. So using these filters, using these blend modes in conjunction with layer masks is the best way to apply an effect to your image, and then make sure that that effect is applied only to those portions of the image where you want it done. So that's it for right now for blend modes. In my next video, I'm hoping maybe to talk about some of the other blend modes that are in there, including a color blend mode. Otherwise, I'll also be talking about filters. Hope that you found this helpful. Again, my name is Nick Marzinski with TrappingLight.com. Thanks for watching.